What's up, you guys? So, I want to go live and go over some of these questions because I am actually studying to be a realtor. Yay! I am in South Carolina and I wanted to go live while I study because I am kind of teaching it to you as I'm learning it myself. And so I feel like this helps me retain that information. Anyway, this information, these questions are actually from the South Carolina Real Estate Prep second edition. And so this book has been very helpful. But continue to, I want to continue to retain this information by teaching it because I heard if you teach it, you apply it to real life, then you're going to learn it. So, first question, which of the following would be defined as real estate as opposed to real property? So, would it be wells, driveways, and signs on the parcel of land? Would it be mobile homes, temporary parked on the partial land? Would it be timber that has been cut and is laying on the partial land? Or would it be business equipment and owner or tenant has placed on a partial land? So the correct answer is wells, driveways, and signs on a partial land. So the reason is because the legal concept of real estate encompasses land and all man-made structures that are permanently attached to the land. It's like the wells, the driveways, and the signs. The phrase permanently attached refers to primarily one's intention in attaching the item. So obviously, very few, if any, man-made structures can be permanently attached to a land in the literal sense. But if a person constructs a house with the intention of creating a permanent dwelling, meaning keeping it there, the house is considered real estate. By contrast, but if a camper affixes that tent to the land with the intention of moving it to another camp in a week or even months later, the tent will not be considered real estate. And so those wells, driveways, signs on parcel of land is real estate as opposed to real property. Next question, which of the following will be considered a property improvement? Would it be an alliteration to land to make it more useful? Would it be an increase in the value of a property? Would it be a chicken coop permanently attached to the land? Or would it be a partial of land that has passed a percolation test? So the correct answer will be a chicken coop permanently attached to the land. So improvements to real estate, such as fences, streets, buildings, wells, sewers, sidewalks, and piers, modification to the land, um, or the development preparation of the land or of a partial land can include such activities of grading or clearing. Neither of these would be considered to be improvements in the sense of that word. So it will be just modifications if you were thinking about alteration to the land, but actually permanently attaching that chicken coop to the land makes that a property improvement. Which of the following best describes the physical boundaries of land? So the physical boundaries of land, it says, is it the surface of the earth and infinite space above the surface? Is it the center of the earth and infinite space is above the earth? Is it the surfaces of the earth and all the water and minerals on or below the surface to the center of the earth? Or is it the surface of the earth and the air rights above the surface to the point defined by local zoning? So the correct answer is the physical boundaries of land is the center of the earth in infinite spaces above the earth. So the legal concept of land encompasses the surfaces of the area of the earth and everything beneath the surfaces of the earth extending down to the center, and all natural things permanently attached to the earth in the air above the surface of the earth extending outwardly to infinity. So that's what it is. Land is beneath, land is the surface, and land is above, extending to infinity. The bundle of rights refers to a set of rights that are enjoyed by the owner of a property that is synonymous with the Bill of Rights, that is guaranteed to a citizen by the Statute of Rights or specified in a deed or land contract. And the correct answer for the bundle of rights is referred to as a set of rights enjoyed by the owner by a property. And so, bundle of rights, this group of rights includes the rights to possess, use, transfer, encumber, and exclude others from using the property. So, the acronym is PUTEE. So, PUTE. So, transfer rights include the right to sell, rent, donate, assign, or bequeath. And the owner may also encumber the item by mortgaging it as collateral for debt. The next one is, which of the following best describe the legal concept of personal property? And so I'm going to just start reading the answers. So the legal concept of personal property is any item of property that is not definable as real property. So personal property is any owned item which is not real estate, and the rights associated with owning the personal property item. Items of personal property are also called chattels of personality. So some people might think, oh, I attached this chandelier, that's personal property. But once you affix it the way you affix it with the intending of keeping it there, then it's no longer personal property. Now, can you negotiate in contracts? Yes, you can. But most of the time, once you attach it, you cannot remove it. But you can remove it if you actually negotiate, like, hey, I put the chandelier up just because, whatever you want to say, and then you put in the contract, the chandelier does not go, but I will put the old chandelier that was there. But anyway, the right to encumber a property means that the owner can pledge the property as collateral for debt. And so an ordinary lease is a common example. Oh, sorry. The right to encumber the property essentially means the right to mortgage the property as collateral for debt. So there may be restrictions to this right, such as the spouse right to limit the degree to which a homestead may be mortgaged. But that's what encumber means. To encumber a property means that you can pledge it as collateral for debt. And that's also in our PUTEE, that acronym, which is possess, use, transfer, encumber, and exclude. Next, a property owner leases 60 acres of agricultural land for a renewal property of 5 years. And the contents of real estate, this lease represents an transfer of a portion of the bundle of rights. So as we know, the bundle of rights includes that PUTEE, which is possess, use, transfer, encumber, and exclude. And so they have transferred a portion of the bundle of rights, which means an ordinary lease is a common example of the transfer of a portion of one's bundle of rights. The owner relinquishes the rights to possess portions of the surface, perhaps a building, in return for rent. The tenant enjoys the rights to possess and use the building over the terms of the lease, after which these rights revert to the landlord. During the lease term, the tenant has no rights to the property, subsurfaces, or airspace other than what the building occupies. Further, the tenant does not enjoy any of the other rights in the bundle of rights. He or she cannot encumber the property or transfer it. To a limited degree, the tenant may exclude persons other than the legal owner from the property. So the tenant actually gets some of those bundles of rights, but once the tenant leaves, it no longer has those rights. And so only a portion of it is transferred to the tenant for the lease term. Alrighty. A homeowner is very upset over a drone that a neighbor flies over his house. He takes this case to a court to end this possible violation of rights. Does he have a case, and on what basis? So, yes, the drone infringes on his air rights. So, air rights apply to the space above the surface boundaries of the partials, as delineated by imaginary vertical lines extending to infinity. Since the advent of aviation, the property rights have been curtailed to allow aircraft to fly over one's property, provided the overflights do not interfere with the owner use and enjoyment of the property. So the issue of violation of air rights from the benefits of air transportation is an ongoing battle. So even though we know we have planes infringing in our air rights, right? But the neighbor cannot continue to do that, because like fly that drone over their neighbor's yard, over their air rights, over their roof, whatever, because again, that is infringing on their air rights. So you do have rights to the air above your dwelling. So if you do own your property, you do have air rights, you do have subsurface rights, unless it's specified in the deed that you don't. Literal rights apply to which of the following? So when you think of literal rights, think about navigable lakes, seas, and oceans. My way of remembering what literal rights is versus what is it, Reptorian? I can't think of the word right now. But when you think of literal rights, think that it starts with an L and lake starts with an L. So if you get that question, think lakes are literal, right? So that's literal rights. And so a littoral, I might be saying it wrong, littoral rights are applied to your navigable lakes, seas, and oceans. And so littoral rights concerns properties abutting bodies of water that are not moving, such as lakes and seas. Owners of properties abutting a navigable, non-moving body of water enjoy the literal right of use, but do not own the water nor the land beneath the water. The legal premise underlying the definition of literal rights is that rights to that lake or sea is a navigable body of water, therefore public property owned by the state. By contrast, a body of water, so if you have a body of water on your land entirely contained within the boundaries of your property and is not navigable, in such a case, the owner would have own the water as well as an unrestricted right of usage. Okay. So think of literal rights applying to navigable lakes, seas, and oceans. A retired couple has just bought a retirement home with a pier on a large lake. In this case, the retiree's water rights extends to it extends to the high water marks of the body of the water at the shoreline. So ownership extends to the high water mark of the body of water. The low water mark would imply that the owner owned the water itself at times of high water levels. And so that will be the answer for that one. A waterfront homeowner has just died. What will become of the water rights the owner enjoyed while living in the home? As we know, they transfer with the property when the property is sold. And so the water rights, the literal rights attached to that property, when the property is sold, those literal rights will transfer with the property to the new owner. Riparian. So riparian, think of riparian. So we have littoral literal rights, and then we have riparian rights. So riparian rights, think R. What starts with R? What body of water starts with R? Rivers. So riparian rights concerns which of the following bodies of water? Streams and rivers. So riparian rights concerns properties abutting moving water such as streams and rivers. If a property abuts a stream or river, the owner's riparian rights are determined by whether the water is navigable or not navigable. If the property abuts a non-navigable stream, the owner enjoys unrestricted use of water and owns the land beneath the stream to the stream's midpoint. If the waterway in question is navigable, the waterway is considered to be a public easement. So remember, a public easement, an easement gives rights for people to use your property, right? So in such a case, the owner property extends to the water's edge as opposed to the midpoint or the waterway. 113. Which of the following best describes a fixture? Fixtures. Who love fixtures? Anyway, the fixture is any item of personal property that has been converted to real property. So that's a personal property that has been converted to real property by attaching it to real estate. That is called a fixture. Typical examples are chandeliers, like I said earlier, toilets, water pumps, septic tanks, window shutters. The owner of real property inherently owns all fixtures belonging to the real property. When the owner sells the real property, the buyer acquires the rights to all fixtures. So think of fixtures of things that are integrated in the property. Like if you take it out, like a toilet, if you take a toilet away, right, you won't be able to use the property properly, right? So when you think of fixtures, just think about, well, you really need those things to make the house function properly. Like you need your septic tank, you need a window, right? No one's taking out a window. If once you install a new window, it becomes part of the property, right? That is a fixture. So yeah. An item may be considered personal property as opposed to real property, provided that the owner intended to remove it after a period of time. So that's why it's personal property. So if you intend to move that chandelier, you just went into, you leased the property, right? You ask the owner, hey, I really like this chandelier. It goes with the design I'm doing. I promise to put back your chandelier once I leave. So that personal property is personal property as opposed to real property because you decided that you're going to remove it after you leave out. So one's original intention can be override the test of movability in determining whether an item is a fixture or not. So remember, it's your intention. If your intention is to move it, then it's not a fixture, it's not real property, a personal property. So if someone attaches an item to real property yet intends to remove it after a period of time, the item is easily removable. The article may be deemed a fixture. For example, an apartment renter installs an alarm system, fully intending to remove that system upon lease expiration. Here, the system will be considered personal property because they're going to take that alarm system and take it to the next property that they're leasing. All right. Two people own a house, each having an undivided equal interest. Which of the following describes what each party owns? So think about it. Sometimes these questions give us answers. So they said two people own a house, each having an undivided equal interest. So that interest has to be equal. Which of the following best describes what each party owns? So they own 50% of the estate consisting of the indivisible whole of the real property. An undivided interest is a owner's fractional interest in an entire undivided estate, but not in a physical portion of the real estate, of the real property itself. An owner who has an undivided equal interest with another cannot exclusive rights over a portion of real estate, which is an indivisible whole. So cannot exercise exclusive rights over a portion of real estate, which is an indivisible whole. So they have a undivided equal interest. So they cannot exercise exclusive rights. They don't have exclusive rights to the property. You know, exclusive rights meaning that you have the highest rights to the property, right? For this specific example, they have undivided equal interest. All right. So I think about when people have some type of tenant in common, estate in common, when I think about stuff like that. Alrighty. The next question is, a real property interest that includes the right to possess is considered an estate and land. So a real property interest that includes the right to possess is considered an estate and land. So in estate and land, our interests are principally distinguished by whether they can include possession. So if the interest holder enjoys the right of possession, the party is considered to have an estate and land, or familiarly in a state. Freehold and leasehold estates and land are further distinguished by the duration of the owner's rights to be determined. So, real property interest that includes the right to possess is considered an estate and land. So, some of the other options that they had was a leasehold estate, a fee simple estate, and the bundle of rights. So, real property interest that includes the right to possess is considered an estate and land. I think I'm gonna start by reading the questions out so that you can see what the other options are. So the right to control land usage, the right to control land usage by zoning in eminent domain is an example of, is it public interest, police interest, and encumbrance in estate and law. So the correct answer is the right to control land usage by zoning in eminent domain is an example of a public interest. All right. We already know there's no such thing as a police interest, okay? All right, so a public interest. Public entities may own or lease real estate, in which case they enjoy an estate and land. However, government entities also have a non-possessionary interest in real estate, which act to control land use for the public good within the entity's jurisdiction. The prime example of public interest is police power, or the right of the local or county's government to zone. Another example of public interest is the right to acquire ownership through the power of eminent domain, which we know eminent domain is what? What is eminent domain? That is the taking of someone's property in exchange for market value price, right? A market value cash contribution to them. All right, so when we think about it, the right to possess is considered, the right to control land uses by zoning and eminent domain is an example of a public interest. This is not talking about the actual process. They're doing it because it's a public interest. Hopefully that makes sense. If the duration of an owner's right in a estate is not determinable, the owner does it have a tenancy at suffrage, a lease fee simple estate, a freehold estate, a leasehold estate. So the correct answer, if the duration of an owner's right in a estate is not determinable, the owner has freehold estate. And so a freehold estate is the duration of the owner's rights cannot be determined by the rights may endure for a lifetime, for less than a lifetime, or for generations beyond the owner's lifetime. By contrast, a leasehold estate has expirations. So that's why it will not be a leasehold estate. It will be a freehold estate. Distinguishing features of a leasehold estate is it an ownership of an interest by a tenant? Is a temporary ownership of the full bundle of rights in a property? Is it unlimited ownership of one's rights in the bundle of rights in a property? Or is it that the estate is limited by a lease term? So we just answered our question before, right? So we know that a freehold estate does not have a determination, right? So a leasehold estate is that is an estate that is limited by lease terms, because I just said that a leasehold estate has terms. A freehold estate does not have terms. So it will be that the estate is limited by a lease term. A leasehold estate is distinguished by a specific duration, as represented by the lease term. Further, leasehold tenants only enjoy limited property rights, such as temporary possession and limited exclusion, right? Because they cannot exclude the property owner, right, from the property. So that's why they have limited exclusion. A landowner conveys a partial property with the provision that the land cannot be developed for retail purposes. Ooh. The new owner immediately begins to develop a retail shopping outlet. The grantor finds out and takes that property back. What kind of estate did this landowner convey? As we know, there's certain types of estates that says you cannot do this. If you do this, I'm gonna take it back, right? So is that a fee simple absolute? Is that a life estate with reversion? Is that a life estate with conditions subsequent? Or is that a fee simple defeasible? The correct answer is that is a fee simple defeasible. And so when you think about it, I think about defeasible, and that prompts me to think that there's something that's going to say, if you do this, then I'm going to take it back, right? So the defeasible fee estate is perpetual, provided the usage conforms to stated conditions. Essential characteristics are that the property must be used for a certain purpose or under conditions, and if the use changes or if prohibited conditions are present, the state reverts to the previous grantor of the estate. So I know it says something about life estate reversion. That doesn't have anything to do with them putting a certain type of estate, and they're saying that if you do this, then I'm gonna get it back. Reversion, it means that once someone dies, or once that term is over with, it reverts back to the grantor or the person who granted the estate or to that person. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Ned grants his sister Alice an estate for as long as she lives. Her descendants, however, cannot inherit the estate. What kind of estate is it? So this will be if this type of estate was to be reversed back to the person, right? This is that example that I'm talking about. So for 120, for this one, it is an ordinary life estate. The reason is because a life estate is limited in the duration in the life of the owner or the other named person. Upon the death of that person, the ordinary life estate, or other named individual, a treaty life estate, the estate passes to the original owner, a reversionary interest, or another named party, a remainder interest. Thus, with the life estate, the owner enjoys the full ownership rights during the estate period, and holders of the future interest own either a reversionary or remainder interest, right? All right, so hopefully this is starting to make sense. Homestead estates are an example of a legal life estate. I know we think of homesteading, we think of people homesteading, they growing their own stuff, but not in real estate. Homestead estates are a legal life estate. So they mean homestead, dower, and courtesy are legal life estates. A legal life estate is created by state law as opposed to being created by a property owner's agreement. The focus of a legal life estate is defining and protecting the property rights of surviving family members upon the death of the husband or the wife. So when you think of home estate, think about home, what a home has, usually a family, right? So just think about, I don't know, maybe that's, to me, I feel like when I think of home, I'm thinking about, oh, my family, this is our home. You have partners and maybe children, who knows? So think about that being a legal life estate. So home estates are an example of a legal life estate. I'm trying to give you some way to tie it together. Lewis owned a boat and a house before marrying Barbara. So he owned a boat and a house before Barbara. While Barbara was single, she owned a new car. That's all. And then when they got together, the two bought a second home. And as a wedding present, Barbara's father bought Lewis a motorcycle. And then under the law of community property, what property can Lewis sell without his wife's consent, a signature? So think about it. Community property means that these are the things that you acquired together, okay? So separate property consists of property owned by either spouse at the time of the marriage, and property acquired by either spouse through inheritance, a gift in the marriage, are also your personal property. Property acquired with separate property funds and income from separate property is also yours. But community property is all the property earned as acquired by either party together during the marriage. A spouse owns separate property free and clear of claims by the other spouse. He or she can transfer it without the other spouse signature. And then upon the death of the separate property owners, the property passes to heirs by will or laws of descent. But community property cannot be transferred or encumbered without the signatures of both spouses. Upon the death of either spouse, half of the descendant's community property passes to the surviving spouse, and the other half passes to the descendant's heirs. So, in our example, Lewis, he had the boat, he had a house before her, and then he got a motorcycle as a present. So those will be things that he can sell without his wife's consent or signature. So the boat, the house, and the motorcycle. Caitlin rents an apartment for a year. What rights has she acquired under the leasehold? Does she have the right to exclude everyone from the premises? Does she have the right to encumber fee interest? Does she have the right to sell the premises? Or does she have the right to possess and use the premises? Think about Putee, P-U-T-E-E. She is leasing it for a year, so she's getting some of the bundle of rights. So she gets the rights to possess and use the premises. Okay. So leasehold tenants are entitled to possess and use the lease premises during the lease term in the manner prescribed in the lease. They also have restricted rights to exclusion. So they can exclude people, but they cannot exclude the owner or the people coming to fix the property because the owner wants the property fixed. But they can exclude people that they don't know that are not someone the owner is sending, right? All right. An estate from period to period will continue as long as. So think about period to period, month to month. I know you probably heard of month to month rents or periodic leases. So basically what that means, they say, is it when the tenant makes and landlord accepts regular rent payments, the term specified in the lease, the period is less than a year, the landlord has not sold the property. So the estate from period to period would continue as long as that tenant makes and the landlord accepts regular rent payments. So it's not really a specified term in a period to period, as we know. But the lease stays up as long as that landlord is accepting those payments and the tenant keeps giving them those payments. Okay, so an estate from period to period, also called a periodic tenancy. The tenancy period automatically renews as long as that tenant pays their rent in a timely manner and the landlord accepts it. At the end of a tenancy period, if the landlord accepts another regular payment of rent, the leasehold is considered to be renewed for another period. A conveyance of a leased property does not cancel a leasehold interest. All right. And an estate at will. So think about an estate at will. Cannot be terminated. Is terminated only if so stated in the leasee's last will and testament. Terminates on the death of lessor or lessee. Terminates on the date specified in the lease agreement. As we know, estate at will. Think about, I'm at will for something, right? Someone has got you at will. That terminates on the death of the lessor or the lessee. And so usually estates at wills can be like you got your mom's using your maybe you got your mom living in a place and she can stay there as long as she wants. But when she dies, right, that's when it terminates. So estate at will is also called a tenancy at will, has no definite expiration date. hence no renewal cycle. So the landlord and tenant agree that the tenancy will have no specific termination date, provided rent is paid on time and the other lease conditions are met. For example, a son leases a house to his father and mother forever or until they want to move, right? The estate at will is terminated by proper notice or by the death of either party. So it can be terminated by death or it can be terminated by proper notice. A tenant continues to occupy an apartment after the lease expiration without the consent of the landlord. So this is not the estate at will, as we can see, because it's without the consent of the landlord. So we already know it's not estate at will. So this type of estate is called, is it an estate at suffrage, a holdover estate, a council leasehold, a hostile leasehold. Now, I might be wrong, but I never heard of a hostile leasehold. So I already know that one's not it. But think about it. This landlord is suffering, right? This person is staying in their property without their consent. So when I think about this, it's an estate as suffering. I'm suffering because you're staying in my property, right? So in a state of sufferance, a tenant occupies the premises without consent of the landlord or other legal agreement with the landlord. Usually such an estate involves a tenant who fails to vacate at the expiration of the lease, continue on occupying without any rights to do so. For example, a tenant violates the provision of the lease and is evicted. The tenant protests and refuses to leave despite the eviction order. So this is a estate at sufferance. So think about it. When you think about something suffering, you know that they're doing something that you don't want them to do. And then for the other example, if it's a estate at will, you're willing it to them. You're giving them this, but you at will for it until they terminate it or the person dies, right? So that's the difference between a state at will and a state at suffering. You're suffering. You're willing it. You're okay with it. But you do know that these two things can happen for it to not be in a state at will anymore. A tenant without a lease has been sending the landlord monthly rent checks, and the landlord continues to accept those payments. What kind of leasehold estate is this? So we just talked about it. If that tenant is sending them payments and that landlord is accepting those payments and they don't have a lease, what do you think it's called? Is it an estate for years? It is a estate from period to period. Is it a estate at will? Think about a estate at will. Or is it a estate at suffering? So for this one, they're sending them monthly rent checks. Think about it. And every month they continue to accept those payments. Thinking about it from an estate from period to period. So an estate from period to period, also called a periodic tenancy. The tenancy period automatically renews for an indefinite period of time, subject to timely payments of rent. At the end of the tenancy period, if the landlord accepts another regular payment of rent, that leasehold is considered to be renewed for another period. So long as I keep accepting those payments, every period, you can keep staying until the next period when you send me another one. But if I say I don't want to stop anymore, then of course, that is the end of that. Right? So, a fee or life estate is held by an individual. This is held by one person, an individual. This form of estate is referred to as tenancy and sovereignty, and tenancy by the entireties, an absolute fee simple, a legal fee simple. So think about when you hold something, you hold the whole thing is held by you. This fee or life estate. That is a tenancy and sovereignty. When you think of sovereignty, right, you think of you hold all of this, right? And I'm thinking of severalty, like you hold all of this by yourself, and sovereignty. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, but you hold it by yourself as an individual, and this is actually the highest form of tenancy and sovereignty. If a single partner owns the fee or life estate. The ownership is a tenancy and sovereignty. Synonyms: a sole ownership, ownership and sovereignty, and state and sovereignty. So if you see a state and sovereignty, ownership and sovereignty, sole ownership, you are the owner. You're the sole owner of this estate. So that's great, right? Six people have identical rights in their property and enjoy indivisible interests. Heard that word, indivisible, right? However, any of the owners may sell or transfer his or her interest without the consent of the others. So this is not a joint tenancy, right? Because these have individual interests. This form of ownership is it a joint tenancy? We know it's not a joint tenancy because they have individual interests and they can sell and transfer their interests without the consent. Is it a homestead ownership? Think about homesteading. Homesteading, those are for couples, right? Those are for married people. So we know that these people have an individual interest. Is it a tenancy in common? They have something in common, right? Or is it an estate and sovereignty? Remember, sovereignty means you own all of it. So we know it's not sovereignty. We know it's not a homestead. We know it's not a joint tenancy. So it's a tenancy in common. So when you think of common, think about, oh, I got something in common with this person. And because I have something in common doesn't mean this person have to like I can keep my thing over here, you can keep your thing over here. We're separate people, right? But we have things in common because we both like this, right? So we have individual interests in this thing and we have it in common with each other. So that is a tendency in common. So that's what I think about when I'm thinking about indivisible interests. We have the same interests, but individually we have an interest in this thing, right? So we can give this thing to somebody else who has an interest in it as well. So a tenancy in common. The tenancy in common, also known as estate in common, is the most common form of co-ownership when the owners are not married, though tenants in common can be married. Okay. Defining characteristics are two or more owners, identical rights, interests individually owned, electable ownership shares, no survivorship, no unity of time. So you don't have to do it together. And with identical rights, co-tenants share an individual interest in the estate. All have equal rights to possess and use the property subject to the rights of the other co-tenants. So you all have the same rights, but you have your individual interests, individual ownership, right? All right, so the four unities required to create a joint tenancy include which of the following conditions? So remember, a joint tenancy can only be created under these unities. So is it parties must acquire respective interests at the same time? Parties must be residents of the same state at the time of acquiring the interests. Parties must be family members. Parties must have joint financial responsibility. So the correct answer is parties must acquire prospective interests at the same time. So when it comes to joint tenancy means you have to create that joint tenancy when all owners have to require that property at the same time. So this, to be in a joint tenancy, I cannot acquire it and then later you come, like months later, you come and be a joint tenant. No, because I already own the property in sovereignty, right? So you cannot be a joint tenant. You can live there, but you are not a joint tenancy, right? Also, at the same time, you're using the same deed. So when that deed is given to me, if you're not here, how is it going to be given to you, right? We have to acquire equal interest. So I cannot say I get 75% and you get 25%. We have to have equal interest and share in the equal interest and rights of possession. So we both have the right of possession and sharing the equal interest. These are the four unities. So that is create the joint tenancy at the same time, use the same deed, acquire equal interest, and share equal rights of possession. Those are the four unities of joint tenancy. Unlike tenants in commons, think about tenants in common. Joint tenants is its own distinct portions of the physical property, cannot will their interests to the party outside the tenancy, may own unequal shares of the property, cannot encumber their interest to outside party. So we just talked about joint tenancy, right? Joint tenancy and tenancy in common. Remember, tenancy in common is we got something in common, but we're separate and we don't have to acquire this at the same time. And I can will my interest to someone else. So unlike tenants in common, joint tenants cannot will their interest to parties outside of the tenancy. We are a joint tenant, right? I cannot will my interests because that person outside cannot become a joint tenant. Remember those four unities. They cannot become a joint tenant. So the correct answer is joint tenants cannot will their interests of parties outside of the tenancy. The survivorship feature of joint tenancy presents an advantage to tenancy in common, in that interests pass without probate proceedings. On the other hand, joint tenants relinquish any ability to will their interests to parties outside of the tenancy. Remember, joint tenancy has survivorship. Tenancy in common, it is passed down to the heirs. It's not passed to the other tenancies in common. All right, 133, legal life estate. Oh, I gave you the answer. Which of the following life estates is created by operation of law rather than by the owner? So, is it a conventional life estate? Is it an ordinary life estate? Is it a legal life estate? Is it a community property life estate? So, when you think about this, think about an operation of law. I'm going to go right with legal life estate. So, a legal life estate is created by state law as opposed to being created by a property owner's agreement. The focus of a legal life estate is defining and protecting the property rights of surviving family members upon the death of the husband or the wife, right? Or it could be husband, wife, whatever, right? But that is what a legal life estate is. That is created by the operation of law. Which of the following is true of a homestead? So we talked about homesteads. Is it a homestead interest cannot be conveyed by one spouse? Because remember, homestead, I meant home. When you're at home, what you have, your parents, right? Is it a homestead interest cannot be passed to the children of the head of household? Is it a homestead interest is a form of conventional life estate? Is it a homestead is primary or secondary residence occupied by a family? So the correct answer is a homestead cannot be conveyed by one spouse. And so a homestead is one principal residence. Homestead, so it's only one principal residence. So as we know, it cannot be a secondary. It says a primary or secondary residence. So anyway, homestead is one's principal residence. Homestead laws protect family members against losing their homes to general creditors attempting to collect on debts. Homestead laws generally provide that the homestead interest cannot be conveyed by one spouse. Both spouses must sign the deed conveying that homestead property. Of course, we know if that person passed away, then it's going to be in sovereignty to that one person. But whenever you're getting a homestead interest, both the spouses have to sign that deed conveying that homestead property. A tenant in common think about a tenant in common, sell or transfer his interest without the consent of the other tenants in common, use his or her interest in the estate to encumber the entire estate, sell, encumber, or transfer his or her interest only to the other tenants in common, sell, encumber, or transfer his or her estate only with the consent of all the other tenants in common. Tenants in common. The correct answer is can sell or transfer his or her interest without the consent of the other tenants in common. You don't have to get consent from them. Can you tell them, yeah, hey, I'm selling this to such and such, but you don't have to get consent from them. You cannot encumber the whole estate because you don't own the whole estate. You cannot do that. That would be unfair to your other tenants in common. And you don't have to just sell to the other tenants in common. If you want to sell to the tenants in common, I'm pretty sure you can, but you are required to sell whoever you want the tenant in common. All right. So all tenants in common have distinct, separable ownership of their respective interests. Co-tenants may sell, encumber, or transfer their interests without discretion or consent from the other owners. A co-tenant may not, however, encumber the entire estate. Which of the following would be considered community property? Think about community property. It's everybody's, right? All right. So is it property acquired before marriage? Is it a motorcycle bought after the marriage with separate property funds? Separate property funds. Is it income derived from community property? Community property. Is it a mother heirloom wedding ring gifted to the wife after her wedding? So as we can already rule out, community is what you use together. You buy together. You use the funds to do this, to get the house, to get the car, whatever. That's community property. So we know the correct answer is income derived from community property. It said community in it. It gave you the answer. All right. So if income producing property has been defined as community property, the revenue acquiring from the investment is likewise community property. Husband and wife and wife, husband and husband, whatever, they decide to buy property together and they're getting income from this property because it's an Airbnb. That is community property. And they're using those funds to buy things with. That is community property that they're buying because they're using it from the money from the Airbnb. They went in together and the money from the Airbnb is getting used to buy the things that they want because it's community property. All right. When real property is held in a land trust, who controls the property? Real property held in a land trust, who controls the property? The trustor, the trustee, the beneficiary, the mortgagee. So, in this answer, it is the beneficiary. A land trust allows the trustor to convey the fee estate to the trustee and to name himself or herself the beneficiary. The land trust applies only to real property, not to personal property. The agreement or deed in trust grants the beneficiary the right to possess and use the property and to exercise control over the actions of the trustee. All right, so they control the property, the beneficiary. In a community property state, community property, John marries Patricia. Prior to marriage, John owned a SUV. During the marriage, John bought a Buick. John and Patricia bought a second property with money earned from Patricia's job. And each individual received a motorcycle from Patricia's uncle as a gift. Which property is community property in this marriage? So think about it. During that marriage, John bought that Buick and then that second property with the money from Patricia's job, right? Now, that is community property. Those are things we know they spent money on together. The SUV John had prior, that doesn't belong to Patricia. That motorcycle that their uncle gave them does not belong to them. So the community property would be the Buick and the second property. Now, I hope that we don't have a tricky question like this on our exam, but it did specify that John bought that Buick with the money from Patricia's job. But when you read it, it says with the money earned from Patricia's job, John bought a Buick. John and Patricia bought a second property with money earned from Patricia's job. So it says that at the end, so you can assume, because it said that with the money from Patricia's job that they bought the second house and the Buick or second property, whatever. So, community property laws define property rights of legal spouse before, during, and after their marriage, as well as after the death of either spouse. Community property law distinguishes real and personal property into categories of separate and community property. Separate property belongs to one spouse, community property belongs to both spouses equally. Separate property is that property which is acquired prior to the marriage, by gift or inheritance during the marriage, property acquired by separate property funds, or income from separate property. Which of the following is true of cooperatives? Cooperatives. All right. Is it a cooperative may hold an owner liable for unpaid operating expenses of other tenants? Is it the owners have a fee simple interest in the airspace of their respective apartments? Is it owners may sublease their apartments even if they sell their stock in the cooperative? The proprietary lease is granted to have a fixed rate of rent over the life of the lease terms. All right, we know what a cooperative is. You know, they do not own their property, right? They own interest into the property. It's kind of like buying stock from Tesla. We don't own Tesla, we own a interest in Tesla, right? So the correct answer is a cooperative may hold an owner liable for the unpaid operating expenses of other tenants. So the reason is because since the corporation owns an undivided interest in the cooperative property, debts, and financial obligations apply to the property as a whole, not to the individual units as a condo. So condos, you have your own unit, you only pay property taxes on your unit. But for a cooperative, you are in this together. We cooperate. We take care of everybody else's debt, right? So we cooperate. So when you think of cooperatives, think about we're cooperating together. We're sharing in the bills, right? That's why the cooperative may hold an owner liable for unpaid operating expenses of other tenants, even though that sucks, right? But we decided to do this together. Which of the following is true of tenancy in common? We love tenancies in common because we have something in common, right? Does it the co-owners must be related? The owners enjoy an indivisible interest, indivisible interest. I think that's what it is, divisible. The tenants must acquire their interest at the same time. Who acquires their interest at the same time? We know that's joint tenancy, right? The tenants must pay an equal amount for their interest in the estate. All righty. So tenancy in common, what's true about it is that they have an indivisible interest. We all keep hearing indivisible interest. Who has an indivisible interest? Tenancy in common. Tenancy in common. So the tenancy in common, also known as estate in common, is the most common form of co-ownership when the owners are not married. Although tenants in commons can be married, the defining characteristics are two or more owners, identify rights, interests, individually owned, electable ownership shares, no survivorship, and no unity of time with identical rights. Co-tenants share an indivisible interest in the estate. All have equal rights to possess and use the property, subject to the right of the other co-tenants. When a tenant in common dies, what happens to the tenant's interest in the estate? Does it divide equally among the surviving tenants in common? Does the surviving tenants buy the interest from the deceased tenant heirs or sell the interest to the heirs? Does it become a joint tenancy? Does it pass by probate to deceased tenants' heirs? Let's see. Yes, it passed by probate to the deceased tenant heirs. So a deceased co-tenant's estate passes by probate to the descendants' heirs and advisees rather than to the other tenants in common. Any number of heirs can share in the ownership of the willed tenancy. So, tenancy in common, we got something in common, right? So that means I own this myself. We don't own it together. We have an indivisible. It is indivisible. I'm gonna get this right. Indivisible interest. Yeah. So with that, I can give it to my son. I can give it to my daughter. I can pass it down to my mom, whoever, right? Which of the following is true of joint tenancy? We are joined together, right? Joint tenancy, we are joined together. No one can stop us. So the joint tenancy, which one is true? Is it the tenant can determine the size of the share owned by each tenant? The size of tenant shares is determined by the amount of equity each has invested in the property. Is it the tenant have an equal and undivisible ownership interest? Or is it there can be no more than two co-owners and each has a 50% interest? The correct answer is which of the following is true of joint tenancy? It's the tenants have a equal and undivisible ownership interest. Alrighty. So again, they have a equal, undivisible ownership, indivisible, ownership interest. All right. So in a joint tenancy, two or more, so it can be two or more, right? Persons collectively own a property as if they were a single person. All right. Joint. We are joining together. When you put all your money together, it's one thing, right? It's not $50 here, $60 there, $30 there. This is not a tenancy in common. We are joining all our money together. We are joining together, right? So collectively, they own the property as if they were a single person. Rights and interests are indivisible and equal. Each has a shared interest in the whole property, which cannot be divided up. Joint tenants may only convey their interests to outside parties as tenants in common interest. One cannot convey a joint tenant interest. So you can't say, hey, you come be a joint tenant. No, you cannot become, you can't come. Once we join all the monies together over here, this is all the monies. Or once we join all the Play-Doh together, all the yellow Play-Doh together, if you're green Play-Doh, you try to come in this, it's not going to join together, right? Because we have joined all the yellow Play-Doh together. We are joined together. Hopefully that makes sense. In contrast to a tenancy in common, in a joint tenancy, there is no single title to the property. Oh, sorry, start over. In contrast to a tenancy in common, in joint tenancy, there is a single title to the property, or there are many titles to the property as there are co-owners, or is it title is held by a trustee, or co-owners who are married hold separate titles. So for the question, in contrast to a tenancy in common, in a joint tenancy, what did I say? We are joined together. So if we're joined together, there is a single title to the property. We can make copies of it, but there's only one single title to the property. So whenever we're as tenants in common, so in tenants in common, they hold their own separacy. I have an interest in this. You have something in common. You have an interest in this, right? We hold our own piece of paper. We hold our own title to the property. So whereas in tenants in common, they hold separate titles to their individual interests. But a joint tenant, together they hold a single title to the property. This is referred to as unity of ownership, okay? If a joint tenant sells his or her interest to an outside party, will the new owner become a tenant in common with the other owners who continues to hold a joint tenancy with each other and a tenancy in common with the new owner? Will the joint tenancy continue with the new owner as the third joint tenant? Will the joint tenant terminates and allow all owners become the tenant in common? Will the tenancy in common terminates and all the owners must create a new joint tenancy to include the new owner? No. So if a joint tenant sells his or her interest outside to an outside party, that new owner becomes a tenant in common with the other owners who continue to hold a joint tenancy with each other in a tenancy in common with the new owner. So a joint tenancy may transfer his interest or her interest in the property to an outside party. Hey, you got something you want to have this interest? Here you go. But only as a tenancy in common interest. They say, oh, I have an interest in that. We got something in common. All right, I'm gonna come. Whoever acquires the interest co-owns the property as a tenant in common with the other joint tenants. So once you join together, you cannot separate us, okay? Only thing can separate us is death, right? Joint tenants may only convey their interest to the outside party as a tenant in common interest, and one cannot convey a joint tenant interest. So as much as you want to give your joint tenancy to someone else, remember there's the 4 unities for a joint tenancy, and it has to be at the same time, right? We have to have the interest at the same time, all right? Next, when a joint tenant dies, what happens to the tenant interest in the estate? Remember, if you die and we're joint tenants, remember we're joined together, but when you leave, what happens? Does it pass to descendants' heirs to become joint tenants? Does it pass as a tenancy in common to descendant heirs? Does the joint tenancy terminate and becomes a tenancy in common with the descendants' heirs and the surviving tenants as co-owners? Or does it pass to the surviving joint tenants? The correct answer is when a joint tenant dies, it passes to the surviving joint tenants. Remember, joint tenancy has survivorship. So, in most states, joint tenancy enjoys rights of survivorship. If a joint tenant dies, all interests and rights passes to the surviving joint tenant, free from any claims of creditors or heirs. When only one joint tenant survives, the survivor interests become an estate in sovereignty, and the joint tenant is terminated. So remember, there's one title in a joint tenancy. Once you pass away, I get that title still. We have one title. We cannot will our interest to someone else, right? It has to be survivorship. Unlike a tenancy in common, we all have our own titles. So if you pass away, you can give your title to someone else, right? All right. Under what conditions can two individuals own a property? Excuse me. Under what conditions can two individuals own a property as tenants by the entireties? Is it if they are so elected at the time, if they so elect at the time of acquiring title, if they are blood relatives, if they are married, if they are incorporate? So if they incorporate, so think about it. Think about tenancy by the entirety. What do you think? The correct answer is they are married. So you have to be married to have tenant by entirety, okay? And tenancy by entirety is a form of ownership reserved exclusively for spouses, husband and wife, wife and wife, husband and husband. It features survivorship, equal interest, and limited exposure to foreclosure. In some states, it applies to same-sex couples, so you got to get your state laws. But that's what tenancy by the entirety. You have to be married, okay? Unfortunately, you got to be married. So if you want to have and tenants by entirety, then be married. Honestly, tenancy in common seems cool too, because if you want to will your interest to someone else, you can. But it's kind of weird if you're living in a house together and then you're willing your interest to someone else, and that person might want to live there. Then it's like two people that don't know each other living together. But whatever. It's whatever you want to do. But if you want tenants by the entirety, remember, we are in this together. Entire house is ours. But do you want to live with somebody that you don't know? Probably not. So you probably want to be married to that person or whatever, or if you in a relationship, right? So they are married. When an estate is held in the trust, which party holds legal title? So in an estate in trust, a fee owner, the grantor or trustor, transfer legal title to a fiduciary, the trustee, who holds and manages the estate for benefits of another party, the beneficiary. The trust may be created by deed, will, or trust agreement. So, is it the beneficiary, the trustor, the trustee, or the grantor? It is the trustee. The trustee holds the title, okay? Just remember that the grantor in a estate in trust, a fee owner, the grantor, or the trustor, so the grantor, transfer that title to the fiduciary. the trustor. So remember the grantor, the trustor, grantor, trustor, both have TOR at the end. Transfer that legal title to a fiduciary, the trustee, who holds that title. So remember, when you're granting something, you're going to grant it. The trustor is granting to the trustee. So that's the way you can remember that the trustee holds that legal title. Tanya buys a 4-bedroom condo as a new owner. She has the rights to. She has a condo. What does she have the right to? Does she have the right to sell or mortgage the unit without impediment from individual owners of neighboring units? Does she sell the interest in the physical unit separately from the interest of the common elements? Does she prevent non-owners from using the unit owner's portion of the common elements? Does she exclusively possess and use those portions of the common area structurally or functionally necessary for the operation of the unit? All right, so the correct answer is Tanya buys a 4-bedroom condo as the new owner. She has the right to sell or mortgage the unit without impediment from individual owners of neighboring units. So she can sell it. It's hers. It's just like if you own the house, right? A condo is like owning your own property. It is not a interest. It's not a share in a property like a cooperative, right? It is a condo. You own it, and you have rights to the common elements of it. So condo units can be individually sold, mortgaged, or otherwise encumbered without interference with other unit owners. An owner may not sell interest in the apartment separately from the interest in the common elements. So you cannot sell, hey, you can have my condo, but you can't participate in all the other common elements, right? Unit owners exclusively possess their apartment space, but must share common areas with other owners. All right, looking at the time. Trying to get through about 50-something questions. It's a lot of questions, right? A condo owner's share of maintenance and operation expenses, I underline that, are based on. So think about your maintenance and operation expenses. What are those based on? Is that based on the unit's pro rata share of floor space? Is it the unit's pro rata share of the property value as defined in the declaration? Is it the number of shares the owner purchased in the condo association? Is it the assessed value of the condo unit? And the correct answer is the unit's pro rata share of the property value as defined in the declaration. So your maintenance and operating expenses are going to be different for someone else's. So think about it. It's based on your unit's pro rata share of the property value as defined in the declaration. So the unit's pro rata share of the property ownership as defined in the declaration determines the amount of a unit's owner's assessments. For example, if a unit represents a 2% share of the property value, that unit ownership assessment will be 2% of the property's common area expenses. So you won't be sharing, you won't have the same amount as someone else unless your property unit represents 2%, just like the other person, right? In a cooperative, real property is owned only by the individual unit owners, the individual unit owners in the cooperative association, the cooperative developer, the corporate entity of the cooperative association. So the correct answer is it is owned by the corporate entity of the corporation association. So when you are in a cooperative, you do not own real property. It might be a real property, but you own interest, you own shares. You do not own that property. The corporate entity of that cooperative association who created it, they own that real property, right? And you just own shares of what they created. So the corporate entity of the cooperative association is the only party in the cooperative with a real property interest. The association interest is an undivided interest in the entire property. There is no ownership interest in individual units, as with condos. So with condos, you own real property. A cooperative, you don't, unfortunately. And there's probably some benefits to it. I don't know. because I don't really know much about cooperatives besides what I learned in this book and with studying real estate. As far as why would someone want a cooperative versus a condo versus a house, I think everyone has their own reasons and you got to decide. Remember, cooperative, if you want a cooperative, you only have a interest, a share. You don't own that property and you just own a share. If you want real property, get a condo, get a townhouse, get a duplex, get a house, single family home, get a multifamily home, whatever. In a timeshare freehold, owners acquire. So think about timeshare. Have you ever been out of town and then got invited to a presentation to purchase shares, to travel to a place to stay there multiple times throughout the year? That's basically what a timeshare is. Is it an undivided interest in the property as a tenant in common? Is it a renewal periodic tenancy from for a portion of a year? Is it a renewable periodic tenancy for a portion of a year? I don't like how that's reading, but whatever. Is it a pro rata share of a lease fee? Is it a tenancy in sovereignty for a portion of a year? Think about tenancy in sovereignty. What is a tenancy in sovereignty? I own all of the timeshares. You don't. So the correct answer is a undivided interest in the property as a tenant in common. Think about tenant in common. We have something in common. We all like staying at this place in Orlando, Florida. So we got a timeshare there, right? You have an undivided interest in that property as a tenant in common, right? Think about a tenant in common. It's not a joint tenancy. If it's tenant in common, what can you do if you're a tenant in common? What? You can will your interest to others, right? So it is a undivided interest in the property as a tenant in common. In the freehold, timeshare, or interval ownership estate, tenants in common own undivided interests in the property. Expense pro rata and rules governing interval usage are established by a separate agreement when the estate is acquired. Okay. A party has just purchased a manufacturing housing unit. When is the property considered real property? So remember, real property, something can be considered real property, and we talked about ways they can be. Is it as soon as you purchase that manufacturing housing unit? And a manufacturing housing unit can be a trailer, those manufacturing homes. Is it as soon as it is constructed? You can construct it on your land, right? Or it can be constructed somewhere else in a factory. But does that mean that it is real property? As soon as it is affixed to the ground. You know what affixed means? As soon as you put that thing in the ground, is that considered real property? Is it a form of property considered personal property at all times? So, when is a property considered real property? If it's a form of property considered personal property at all times, then is it really real property? No. So the correct answer is as soon as it is affixed to the ground. So mobile home units and manufacturing homes are personal property. Unfortunately, they're personal property. Even if you have a mortgage on it, it's personal property. You have a loan on a trailer. Until it is affixed to the ground, that's when it becomes real property. Because think about it, you can move that trailer to another lot, to another lot, to another lot, to out of state, right? So it is personal property until it is affixed to the ground. So once it's secured to the foundation of the lot, in whatever form, it is real property. But before it is affixed, these items are personal property. Okay. Now let's talk about encumbrances, liens, title transfers, and recording leases. Yay, right? All right, so which of the following describes an encumbrance? So does that mean? So think about encumbrance. We talked about encumbrances. Someone can be on your property, right? So which of the following describes an encumbrance? Is it a third-party rights to encroach upon a property without the permissions of the property owner? Is it a third-party rights to claim the sale proceeds of a property that has been mortgaged as collateral for a loan? Is it a third-party interest in a real property that limits the interest of the freehold property owner? Another right to acquire a freehold interest in a property against the property owner's wishes. The correct answer is an encumbrance is a third-party interest in the real property that limits the interest of the freehold property owner. So, in effect, encumbrance is another's right to use or take possession of a legal owner's property, or to prevent the legal owner from enjoying the full bundle of rights in the estate. So, that's what encumbrance is. Which of the following is true of an easement in general? So, do they involve the property that contains the easement in a non-owning party? Do they apply to a whole property, not to any specific portions of the property? Do they only involve the legal owner of the property? Do they require a specific use but cannot prohibit one? The correct answer is that easement in general involves the property that contains the easement in a non-owning party. So think about an easement. Something is making you uneasy as the owner because you got this non-owning party that's using part of your property. So the easement is an interest of real party that gives the holder the right to use portion of the legal owner's real property in a defined way. One cannot own an easement over one's own property. Easement rights may apply to a property surface, subsurface, or airspace. I had a alarm on for how long I was going to study, y'all. Airspace. But the affected area must be defined. Easements may be affirmative, allowing a use, using a right of way, or a negative, prohibiting a use, such as an airspace easement that prohibits one property owner from obstructing another's ocean view. So that means that if you have an airspace easement, they might say, hey, you can't build this tall because then you're going to block the view for the person behind you. So you might have a limit on your house height. Or you might have to allow your neighbor to pass through your yard to leave because of y'all shared driveways. So that's basically what an easement is in general. Mr. King wants to offer 100 acres of his property for sale. Since the property is landlocked, he will have to put in a driveway to the road that will run across his remaining property. What kind of easement will he have to grant? So would it be an easement in gross, a commercial easement, a personal easement, or an easement appurtenant? So the correct answer is an easement appurtenant. That gives a property owner a right of usage to portions of an adjoining property owned by another property or another party. The property enjoying the usage right is called the dominant tenant or the dominant estate. The property contained in the physical easement itself is the servient tenement, since it must serve the easement use. So the easement that he had to grant was an easement appurtenant because, again, they have to grant this right of usage, especially if it's a portion of adjoining property owned by another party. So that person has to be able to get through, right? Or they're just going to stay at home, right? They can't get any groceries delivered. They can't leave. They just going to just sit in their house and they can't interact with the world because they don't have a driveway to leave, right? So they had to put in that driveway. And the person who if they have to go through someone else's driveway to leave, then that becomes the servant, right? And you are the dominant. You are the dominant person because you dominate this easement because you do it over this person's lot. You are in control over this person's yard because you can go through their yard to get to your house. Now, it has to be specific. It can't say that, hey, you can drive through their yard, but they have to be specific in that easement. You have to use this driveway to get to this road or whatever. So if property alpha has a court-ordered easement across property beta, in order for alpha to have access to a public road, the easement is an easement by prescription, a personal easement, the easement by necessity, All right, easement and gross. So when you think about this, it's a necessity. Like he got to get through in order to get to that road, right? To that public road. So it's a necessity. So the correct answer is easement by necessity. An easement by necessity is an easement appurtenant granted by a court of law to a property owner because of a circumstance of necessity, most commonly the need for access to a property. Since property cannot be legally landlocked or without legal access to a public thoroughfare, a court will grant an owner of a landlocked property an easement by necessity over adjoining property that has access to a thoroughfare. Same like the other question. They had to do is easement appurtenant because they cannot not allow that person not to be able to leave their house, right? So they have to do an easement by a necessity. It's necessary for me to get to the road, and I need to do this by going through your yard, right? An encroachment. I am encroaching on something. Think about someone's encroaching, right? Ugh, right? So an encroachment is an easement that has not been recorded on the title of the burdened property. Is an unauthorized physical intrusion of one property into another. Is it the right granted by a property owner to the owner of an adjoining property to build a structure that protrudes across the property boundaries? Is it a structure that does not comply with a zoning ordinance? So when you are encroaching, think about you are an unauthorized physical intrusion of one property to another. So you are intrusion of this person property. You are encroaching. I am approaching, right? I'm thinking I'm approaching your property and I'm going across. So I am encroaching. I am encroachment. So an encroachment is an unauthorized physical intrusion of one's owner's real property into that of another. Example of encroachments are a tree limit extending into the neighbor's property, violating his or her airspace, a driveway extending beyond that lot line onto the neighbor's land, and a fence built beyond the property line. So if your property line stops right here and you got your fence over here, then you are encroaching on that person's property. So that is encroachment. A court may grant an easement by prescription if a town needs to dig a trench across a owner's property to install a sewer line to a neighboring property, and the owner refuses permission. Refuses. I don't know why me talking and saying words is not working right now. A property owner sells the front half of a lot and wants to continue using the driveway to access the rear of the lot. So think about easement by prescription. A trespasser has been using the owner's property for a certain period with the owner's knowledge, but without permission. A property owner wants to prevent the owner of an adjoining property from building an improvement that blocks her view. So easement by prescription. This is like giving me prescription to do something, right? To take something. So that will be if it is an easement by prescription, a trespasser has been using the owner's property for a certain period with the owner's knowledge, but without permission. If someone uses another property as an easement without prescription for a statutory period of time and under certain conditions, a court order may give the user the easement right by prescription, regardless of the owner's desire. For prescriptive easement order to be granted, the following circumstances must be true. The use has been occurred without permission or license, and the owner knows or is presumed to have not known of the use, and the use has been generally uninterrupted over the statutory prescriptive period. So basically, I'm going to give you this prescription. I know you've been taking the medicine anyway, so I'm going to prescribe it to you so you can legally keep taking this prescription. But I already know you're doing it. So think about that. When you think about an easement by prescription, they've been doing it for so long. The owner knows about it, even though they have no desire to allow them to keep doing it. They're going to get a court order right to be able to do it because they've been doing it anyway. So go ahead and give them a prescription. They've been taking the medicine anyway. The purpose of a deed restriction is to enable an owner to specify So think about deed restriction. That means they're restricting something, right? When you have a restriction, you're saying this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do. Is it to specify the form of ownership in which a property may be held? Is it how long a property must be owned before it can be legally transferred? Is it what groups of people are legally excluded from the future ownership of a property? As we know, we cannot discriminate, because if we say what groups of people, really that's illegal. So we know it's not that one. Or does a deed restriction specify how a property may be used and what improvements may be built on it? To me, I think it's the last one, because think about it. You're restricting someone. So a deed restriction is to enable an owner to specify how our property may be used and what improvements may be built on it. So a deed restriction is a limitation imposed on a buyer use of a property by stipulation in the deed of conveyance or recorded subdivision plat. A deed restriction may apply to a single property or to an entire subdivision. A developer may place restrictions on all properties within a recorded subdivision plat. Subsequent resales of properties within the subdivision are thereby subject to the plat's covenants and conditions. So think about it. When you read the word deed restriction, always restricting me to do something. Okay? And then that's how you know you're going to find the answer that says, this is restricting me to do this, to do that. Melinda purchases a house and finances it. The lender, in turn, places a lien on Melinda's title. The lien in this mortgage transaction is it evidence of debt incurred by a property owner? Is it a promissory note granted by a property owner as security for a debt? Is it the creditor's claim against the property as collateral security for the loan? Is it a document required to clear clouded title? So the correct answer is, in this question, Melinda purchases a house and finances it. The lender, in turn, places the lien on Melinda's title. The lien in this mortgage transaction is the creditor's claim against the property as collateral security for the loan. So a lien is the creditor's claim against the personal or real property as security for a debt of the property owner. If the owner defaults, the lien gives the creditor the right to force the sale of the property to satisfy the debt. For example, a homeowner borrows $5,000 to pay for a new roof. The lender funds the loan in exchange for the borrower promissory note to repay the loan. At the same time, the lender places a lien on the property for $5,000 as security for the debt. If the borrower defaults, the lien allows the lender to force the sale of the house to satisfy the debt. In a lien theory state, what kind of interest does a mortgage lender have in the lien property? Is it a possessory interest? Is it a tenancy by mortgage interest? Is it a legal interest in a pro rata share of the property? Is it an equitable interest? The correct answer is a equitable interest. And so the lender generally has an equitable interest in the property, but not a legal ownership. So it's not legal ownership, it's equitable interest. So the exception is a mortgage lien on a property in a title theory state. So if it's a title theory state, in this state, the mortgage transaction conveys legal title to the lender, who holds it until the mortgage obligations are satisfied. Then they will give the title to the borrower. During the mortgage loan period, the borrower has an equitable title to the property. So they have an equitable title to the property, but they don't actually have the title to the property. Same thing when you have a mortgage lien theory, then the the mortgagee has the equitable interest. I was trying to think in my head. Mortgagee is the lender. Mortgager is the borrower. Think about borrower. Anyway, in a lien theory state, or did that one. How is a lien terminated? So think about it. If you have a lien, right, that means either you have a lien against your house. It's just a lien. It's basically someone is saying you owe them some money, right? So how is a lien terminated? Is it payment of the debt, that payment of the debt that is the subject of the lien and recording of the satisfaction? Is it transfer of the property that has the lien? Is it recording of another lien that is superior? Or is it a death of the lienor, the lienee? So as we know, death doesn't mean that you don't still have any liens, right? You don't still have any um, debt to satisfy. When they sell your house, right? They're gonna take the money and pay off your debt, right? So a lien is terminated based on the payment of the debt is subject of the lien and recording of the satisfaction. So a lien doesn't just go away. You have the way you terminate it is by paying it off. So payment of the debt is the subject of the lien and recording of the satisfaction. A lien terminates on the payment of the debt and recording of the documents. Payment of the debt and recording of the appropriate satisfaction documents ordinarily terminates the lien. If a default occurs, a suit for judgment or foreclosure enforces the lien. These actions force the sale of the property, which satisfies the lien, right? They're going to force the sale. They're going to distribute the funds based on if it is a superior or a junior lien, right? They're going to pay off everything. And if there's anything left, you get the rest, right? So I'm going to do a few more and then I'm going to stop. A judge rules in favor of the creditor in a court proceeding and places a judgment lien against all the debtor's assets, including his real property. This is an example of, isn't it voluntary junior lien? Are you going to volunteer? First of all, are you going to volunteer this? We know you're not volunteering this, so we can rule out it's not a voluntary junior lien. Isn't it involuntary superior lien? Isn't it involuntary specific lien? Think about specific. Is it specific things? So we know it's not specific. Is it an involuntary general lien? So it would be an involuntary general lien. And the reason is a general lien is one placed against any and all real and personal property owned by a particular debtor. An example is an inheritance tax lien placed against all property owned by the heir. A specific lien attached to a single form of real or personal property and does not affect other property owned by the debtor. In addition, judgment liens are junior involuntary liens. Okay. A real property tax lien, a federal income tax lien, a judgment lien, and a mortgage lien are recorded against a property. Ooh. What lien will be paid first when the property is sold? Is it real estate tax liens? Is it federal tax lien? Is it federal income tax lien? Is it judgment lien or mortgage lien? The correct answer is a real estate tax lien. As we know, everything goes in a certain order of how they will pay it. So the correct answer is a real estate tax lien. The category of superior or senior liens ranks above the categories of inferior or junior liens, meaning that superior liens receive the first payment from the proceeds of a foreclosure. The superior category includes liens for real estate tax, special assessment, and inheritance tax. Other liens, including income tax liens, mortgage liens, and judgment liens, are inferior. So those will be after the superiors are paid. A lien holder can change the lien priority over junior lien by agreeing to, is it change the date of recording? You can't change the date of recording. The date of recording is the date of recording. Lower the amount of the claim. Lowering does not change the lien priority, okay? Cancel the lien. The only way you can cancel it if you pay it off, right? Subordinate the lien. So the correct answer is subordinate the lien. And the reason is a lien can change the priority of a junior lien by voluntarily agreeing to subordinate or lower the lien's position in the hierarchy. So this change is often necessary when working with a mortgage lender who will not originate a mortgage loan unless it is the senior to all other junior liens on the property. The lender may require the borrower to obtain agreements from other lien holders to subordinate their liens to the new mortgage. So you will have to do a lot more work to change it, but you can change it by subordinating the lien. Which of the following I'm stretching, y'all. Sitting in this one spot for a long time. Which of the following accurately describes the act of foreclosure? Is it a court order acceleration of loan payments? If a foreclosure, do you think they're going to be accelerating loan payments so we can already root that one out? Is it the final step in a bankruptcy filing? You can foreclosure and not go bankrupt, so we're going to root that one out. The proceedings to enforce a lien by forcing the sale or transfer of a secure property. That one seems interesting. Is it proceedings to take equitable title to a property that was liened as security for a mortgage loan? So the correct answer is a proceeding to enforce a lien by forcing the sale or transfer of a secured property. So all liens can be enforced by the sale or other transfer of title of the secured property, whether by court action, operational law, or through powers granted to the original loan agreement. The enforcement proceedings are referred to as foreclosures. Note that lieners already possess equitable title. Remember, so you're not taking equitable title. So that's why we're ruling out the last one, because they're not taking equitable title, right? So that's enforcing a lien. So they do not need to undertake a legal proceeding to establish it. So they don't need to um they don't need to take equitable title to the property because they already possess it. So the correct answer is a proceeding to enforce a lien by forcing the sale or transfer of a secured property. All right, you guys, this was a lot. It's so much. I would suggest that you continue to study and to, take a combination of the CE shop, but also buy books like that are geared towards your state specifically. Look on PSI. If you're taking it through PSI, look on PSI to see what books you can take. If you don't want to pay for something else, getting a book, reading it, going through it continuously, making a study plan, teaching some people the stuff, listening to videos, recording yourself. These are tips. It's kind of hard to apply real estate in your everyday life unless you're working in an office already as maybe a front desk person. So I don't have a way to apply it to my everyday life, but if you can teach it to people, talk to people about it, get into study groups, and memorization is key because it is a lot of terms and we don't know which ones are going to be on the test. So wherever you're struggling at, maybe take more time there. But I find if I just go through it all, then I constantly keep reiterating in my brain the same terms, and even reading questions and doing multiple quizzes because I pay for the extra on CE Shop. I pay for the extra test prep, so I'm going through doing those exams multiple times, trying to make at least 80 plus, and yeah. And then believe in yourself. You got this. You got this. You can do this. All right. And I hope this has been helpful for you. And have a great day, you guys. Bye.